Hey guys, Brian here from Better Chess Training, and in today's video I want to share a game of mine that I played over the board recently, and uh, it's not the best one of my games, and so I want to share what was really instructive about this game, because even though it wasn't the best played, I think the mistakes I made highlight how I should go about looking at my games afterwards, and maybe can offer you insight into how to learn from your games as well. But here it's the time controls a game in 80 with a 5 second delay, so it's a decent time control, and my opponent's rated around 1800, so just slightly below me, 1800 USCF. So I'm playing the white pieces, and I'm going to go through it and going to focus really on not kind of reviewing the whole game, but sort of the key areas where I think were most instructive to me, and maybe shed some light onto how we should analyze our game. So started out with a French defense, and here I played the exchange variation: e takes d5, e takes d5, knight to f3, knight to f6, bishop to d3. This is all book. Bishop to d6, and queen to e2 check. And this is my system that I play against, and it is one of the main moves in this system. Well, my opponent plays queen to e7, which is the theoretical move, and then I take. And here there are two main responses, and the most popular response is bishop takes e7, with the idea that after castles and castles, the rook, the white rook, is the first to the e file, and kind of black is just slightly behind because of this tempo. However, my opponent played king takes e7. Now, this is the first moment in the game where I was not in book, but this is actually a theoretical move as well, and has been played by the likes of, or in a Magnus Carlsen game. Actually, I'm not sure if he is the one who, he played the white side of this against Varujan Akobian. So this is actually a in the Pro Chess League. So this is actually a move that has been played at the master level. But at the time I thought, oh, this has to be some type of blunder. So I was trying to find a way to exploit it. Where really, if you look at it with the queens off the board, black maybe does lose a little bit of time, because eventually he's going to play his rook to e8 anyway and move his king to f8. But my mindset here was not necessarily that I should be trying to punish this move, which is sort of the mentality I had over the next few moves, which led to some slight errors. So I castle, which is fine, rook to e8, and here theoretically is rook to e1 check is the main move played by the likes of Carlsen, Lecco, Beckro, as well as other masters. So that game with Carlsen that I mentioned started off this way. And the idea here is that black is losing a little time with his king, but because we're in exchange French, not you can see here it's still a fairly symmetrical game, but Magnus Carlsen, being Magnus Carlsen, went on to win. But instead, I tried to take advantage of the fact that the king was in the center. I played bishop to g5. Now, this isn't a bad move either, but it was not is not the main move. Okay, knight to d7 was played, and here was my first mistake. And a couple moves I had in mind. One was knight to c3, of course, attacking the pinned piece here, and the other one was c4, which is what I played in the game. Now let me show you what happens here with knight to c3, because this is actually the best move. Of course, this is being attacked, so c6 is played. Now, of course, king to f8 can also be played so that the knight can defend, but then we have knight to b5 hitting this rook, or I'm sorry, hitting this bishop, and maybe winning the two bishops. For example, if he tries to retreat, then of course I'm just going to win the exchange. There's really no other place to go, so the best move here maybe is to, or one of the best moves is to counterattack with knight to e6. So at least he's not getting his pawn structure wrecked. And after knight takes d6, knight takes d6, at least according to the engine, but I tend to agree with the two bishops and this lead in development, that white has a significant advantage. In fact, we have moves like this. Bishop takes h7. And normally this move, and actually I overlooked this in the game because normally this type of move gets trapped by g6, but the problem here is that we have bishop to h6 check, which drives the king out. And now there's a lot of trouble here for the black king. But anyways, my idea though, because I had this idea that I needed to punish my opponent, I wanted to open lines up, which is normally a good thing to do. And in this case, it's not horrible, but knight to c3 is just much better. Speeding up development, getting the rooks connected much faster than black can. Instead, I play c4. And the idea here is that now the f7 square is weak. So the idea itself is not totally incorrect, but after the game moves, d takes c4, bishop takes c4, I've seemingly, and here knight to c6, achieved what I wanted, which is basically this bishop aiming at f7, and maybe I'm going to play here. But if we look at the actual position, it was sort of a fantasy idea of mine, and I didn't really calculate the fact that I could never get my knight to e5 or to g5, at least in this type of position, safely. So my opponent plays h6. I played bishop to h4. I also thought of bishop to d2 here, and in hindsight, they seem about equal. But the idea here that I had was that eventually, maybe I could trade off here. If he takes here, I can open up the f-file. Now I have this other attacker. Again, and you'll see this actually does happen in the game, but it actually, my evaluation of the position, for me, to use the computer terms, I thought I was like +2, +3 already, or maybe, I thought I was moderately winning. Whereas as I am analyzing this with the engine, I see that it's about even, and that black actually has a slight advantage. Why? Because the computer could see that once he develops this knight, and once he gets this bishop out, he's really not worse for wear. And this pawn, as we'll see later in the game, actually becomes a bit of a target for black. And that's what, now knowing this, and again, this French exchange often does lead to an isolated queen pawn, but it's understanding the context as to when that is fine for white or when it's just not that great. In this case, it's one of the latter where it's just not that great. So here, I did have this idea of playing knight to b5, but he stops that with c6. And here I play rook to f1, which I thought was pretty good, challenging his rook and basically going to take over the e-file. Rook takes e1 check. Rook takes e1. g5 happened in the game. And here, again, I thought I had some type of advantage, some type of dynamic advantage, but the engines are saying that it's equal. And it's not always that you should necessarily agree with the engines. Often they're more right than you are, unless you're a grandmaster or a titled player. But my perseveration of the thought that I had this great advantage, I think, hampered some of my judgment in the game. Okay, bishop takes g3, f takes g3, and here again, now I think I've got this attack that's going to be coming in. All right, knight to b6 happens, bishop to b3, and here my opponent plays bishop to d7. Actually, this is a little bit, maybe not the very best move here. The engine is suggesting that the bishop should be posted more aggressively, and this actually makes sense because here, as happens in the game, I attack, and instead of what he played in the game, he could have just blocked. He could have played bishop to e6 here, for example, or maybe played something like this, blocking the diagonal. But this bishop is much more effective here than you'll see in the game. Okay, f takes g6, knight to b6, bishop to b3, bishop to d7 was played. And here I played knight to e5, hitting the bishop. And so that's the problem. I'm getting this tempo because he doesn't want me necessarily to take that. So makes d probably was the best move in the position, but bishop to e8. And so this awkward development here where this this bishop is here on e8, again, lended credence to the fact that I had this huge positional advantage, which, again, with this weak pawn and with black, not necessarily, besides f7, he really doesn't have any weaknesses at the moment. So here I played rook to f1, which probably a decent move, putting more pressure. King to g7. And here, I did think I played okay here, except that, again, I thought I was winning versus maybe just having some initiative here. Here I played g4, and the idea behind this was that I was going to shift my knight over to f5. And that was the idea behind this g4, because on g3 it actually serves a very good purpose, which is that it covers the f4 square. Okay, so playing g4 is a big deal, but the idea here was that it was the way to get my knight into the game. Okay, g4 is played. Rook to d8, now putting pressure, and I had calculated this, so knight to e2 came fairly quickly in the game, and now knight f to d5. So here I did have a couple ideas, and one was to play something like this, and after knight to f4 came in, I did see this fork. For a while, I thought maybe I should have played something like rook to e1 here. Or actually, after the next move. Knight to f5 check was played. And then my opponent chooses to protect the h-pawn. And so I had a big decision to make here. And at this point of the game, I thought I did a lot of calculation about, and I thought maybe that trading these pawns would be advantageous for me. But I actually made a couple inaccuracies. In this position, the thing to note is that this check is actually quite devastating. So what I should actually do here is, and again, the engine helped me find this. I was looking at moves like rook to f2, but it's actually more accurate to play this move, rook to e1. And the idea here is now we don't have that check. And here, let's say he plays f6, we could actually counterattack with g3, which is quite nice. If he takes, then we take here. And then let's say he takes, if he takes with the e-pawn, it's actually quite good for me because of rook to e7 check. And if he takes with the g-pawn, that's problematic too because I'm still grabbing this pawn. So material is even here, but now with the d-pawn being protected by my knight, and it's going to take a couple moves to contest, we're actually in pretty good shape. For example, if he tries to play something like bishop here, we have this check. And after, say, king to h8, we can actually play something like, well, we can either grab this pawn, but we can actually protect this knight here so that if he takes with the idea of winning this pawn, I think we can take back, actually the engines tell me take with the pawn. I was thinking of taking with the bishop. And then if he takes here, then we're actually almost developing a mating net here, like this. And it's going to be very hard to stop. He has to bring his bishop back, f7, and blockading. And then I think, let's see, I think I could play this. Oh, no, not quite, because he can actually play that. So instead, I could take this and just continue this pressure here. You know, he plays king to g7, and I can grab this pawn. If he protects this pawn, for example, playing something like a4, oh, I'm sorry, he can't play that because of this. He's in a lot of trouble because he can't really protect his pawn. You know, if I go here, then I take this anyway because of advancing. So he's just going to lose a lot of pawns here. Okay, let's go back to the game. Now, what was my idea here was that I was calculating all of these lines of capturing on f7. Um, by the way, rook to f2, which I looked at, then gets hit with f6. And after knight to f7, bishop takes f7, bishop takes f7. Now, I think black can just play something like this. And with kind of an even game, this is always going to be a little bit of a weakness. But really, he's not really any worse for wear. The engine says this is about even. Okay, so here I chose bishop takes f7. And here I looked at a few of the positions. I do think this is okay for white. But after knight to f2 check, king to f2, knight takes d4, again I had another big decision. And I made what ends up being not such a great move. I played bishop takes e8. And what was the idea here? The idea was that if he tried to take here, then I get this fork in, bishop to g6 check, and then I'm just winning. But that's not the way to make decisions. What I should be looking for is black's best move, which is what I also saw, which was to take here on e8, which he did in the game. And then instead of making maybe the next best move after this, which would be knight takes d4, which I had calculated, I figured, okay, well, that's okay. He's going to take here, and then my position's okay at this point. But what I did, which was, again, I'm not sure exactly what I was looking for, was some type of trap. I played rook to e1. And this point, this was a mistake. It's not a totally losing mistake, but it is a mistake because I did not calculate my opponent's response here. Of course, he's not going to take the knight. But what I didn't see was rook to f8. And this idea is that maybe he's just going to win a pawn. I was able to find perhaps the best response, which was this, which was king to g1. Because then after he takes with the knight, I play rook to f1, and now I'm the one that's pinning his knight. Here, and this happened in the game, but let's go back here. And I guess what should have set the alarm bells off is that during the game I thought, okay, well, my knight is protected, but I didn't think to myself. And then I also thought, okay, if he takes this, I just take here, and then I'm going to play g4. But I didn't look at any other moves. So what I need to do, so the lesson here for me, and you've seen this in a few of the other moves I've played, is that I need to be looking for my opponent's best moves and try to calculate that out, and then make the decision whether or not to make the move. So let's go through the game here. Luckily, I did find this. And here, again, he plays this move. And I just take. I did consider taking with the rook, which analysis shows is probably okay as well. But I wanted to. I was thinking that this passed pawn would be would be effective. My opponent plays king to g7, and here I play g4. So here, now I think during the game I was thinking that I'm slightly better. But looking at the engine, it's 0.00. So it's dead even at this point, and I should evaluation and being able to what I'm realizing, or what I've realized, but need to develop my skill in, and maybe you guys should too, is that evaluating the position, meaning knowing whether you're winning or losing or if it's even, is a very important skill. And I think analyzing your games and comparing what you thought during the game with what the engine's saying or what your coach is saying or what other strong players are saying is really important in order to develop that skill and also point out any weaknesses you have in those skills. So that was one of my big takeaways from this particular game, is that a lot of my evaluations were just wrong. Maybe over optimism would be the better phrase here. So let's keep going here. Rook to e8. At this point, it is pretty even for most of the game, and I think I played fairly well here. The idea here, by the way, is I don't want to retreat because I'm trying to prevent his rook from entering the second rank, in which case he would probably be winning. So rook to e1 ends up being the best move. Here he brings his knight over, and here I'm just trying to centralize my king and also get out of any potential checks here. At this point, I'm kind of seeing what he's doing, and then I realize it's time to trade. And here, probably actually a little bit worse because his king's going to be the first one to enter, but I still think I can hold this. Again, I'm not... the purpose of this video isn't analyzing the endgame. I'm trying to show you the points of mistakes and maybe what I'm going to do in the future about it and things to look for in your games. Here, H4 is actually, this was a pretty strong move. The idea being to try to destabilize this knight. Of course, he's not going to let it get taken. And then this makes this a little bit easier. This passed pawn actually becomes quite dangerous later, as we'll see. But the game overall is even. My opponent here had a few opportunities to take the advantage, but luckily he didn't. We are both in time trouble at this point, so I don't really fault him for that mistake. Actually, this was... we both had... I had about less than a minute under the clock, and I had a 5-second delay, so I was actually pleased to see this. I saw he was going to win the whole tempo war here, but that by bringing his pawn here, it allowed me to hop here to win it. So that was actually pretty good. What he should have done here, which would probably cement at least a draw, was he should have just taken this pawn. But instead he kind of fiddles around, he allows me to advance, and then he starts to advance his pawn. Here, this actually was a big error, but again, we're both in time trouble. So I thought, okay, if he takes this, he can't stop my pawn, but the problem is I can't stop his either. So had he seen that, if he had 5 minutes on the clock, he probably would have seen it. But again, I think we're both under a minute at this point. So that's why I'm kind of playing through this quickly. I'm realizing he's going to get this pawn, and I'm hoping for at least a draw. But here... Again, both of us in time trouble, so no fault of his own. He makes this mistake. And the error he thought was that after he takes and after I take, he thought that I would take here and then he could take here for the draw. But as you guys can probably see, after this, I just advanced my pawn. And he actually played on for a few more minutes, but I was able to. I had 12 seconds left on my clock. But with a 5-second delay, as you've seen from my video on this, I can finish this up pretty quickly. So, hey guys, I hope you found that video helpful and interesting. And I hope you saw that the point I was trying to make is that you are trying to find better moves. You are trying to find where you made mistakes and what you should have played. But even more so, you should be looking at how you are thinking about the positions, the evaluations you're making, the variations you're calculating, and where that can be improved. Maybe there are habits you have developed that you can change. Having a coach might help, but I think a lot can be done through careful analysis and introspection. So thanks for watching. If you are not already subscribed, hit the subscribe button right down there. And then actually I have a video over here about old video I made about how to analyze your games for improvement, which kind of talks about some of these aspects that we touched upon today. So have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.